Well, thank you very much for that very gracious and generous introduction. And it's a great honor and a privilege for me to be with you today at this critical moment for universities and for pre-university education. I want to begin by expressing my great admiration for the work of FIRE in highlighting issues connected to free expression and academic freedom in universities, and I'm especially pleased to be with this particular faculty network group. Faculty are the core of any university, and collectively they inevitably, as they should, set the cultural and educational tone in which questions of free expression figure so prominently. I know many in this group today have been consistently committed to creating and sustaining an outstanding university, and who have resisted efforts to suppress the free expression and academic freedom necessary to have a great university. This work has required clarity of vision, commitment to values, and demonstrated courage, and I want to express my appreciation and support for those of you who undertake this task. Free expression, of course, is not just an issue for universities, but for societies and cultures more generally. I'll begin with the principles of academic freedom, open inquiry, free expression, and intellectual challenge, what they are about, and why they are important. And to do so, it's useful to emphasize what I will not discuss, namely the stance in law of various countries toward free speech. As we all know, different countries have different histories and cultures, and their precise stance toward speech and society as a whole may reflect these differences. In the United States, of course, the First Amendment asserts in part that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Just every time I say that, I'm astonished at how powerful and remarkable a statement it is. Two of the underlying reasons that are often articulated as to why this is so important are the importance of open debate to having an effective democracy, and we have a democracy, and it would be good if it was an effective one, and the notion of individual liberty, reflecting the preamble statement of the purposes of the Constitution, which ends its list of reasons for being with this statement, the goal to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. So while this whole question of speech and society is a fascinating topic, both from it being a topic to be thought about nationally, but also comparatively, it's not my topic today. And in fact, there are probably people in this room and someone who I expected to be here, but I do not see, with much greater standing than I to address both the national and comparative issues regarding speech in society. Rather, my topic is about the mission of universities, what they contribute to society, particularly over the long run, what's necessary for universities to fulfill their mission at the highest possible level of excellence. And having been in the fortunate position of leading what I think is one of the great universities in the world, I've had a lot of time to think about these types of issues. So maybe I have some standing to say something useful about them. So it is in this context about universities, their mission, and fulfilling their mission at the highest possible level that the considerations of academic freedom and free expression arise, and it's in that context that I'm going to discuss it. We're in a time of grave challenge for universities worldwide, and we see this playing out across the globe. Namely, the values of academic freedom, open discourse, free expression, deep questioning, broad intellectual challenge, and independent thought are under significant attack. The specific social, cultural, and political drivers of such attacks vary around the world, and they're not uniform in any one country. I think we have drivers of very different sorts in our own country, but these threats have many commonalities as well. I believe the stakes are extremely high, and we should not underestimate them. And in responding to these challenges, each university will define what it is, what it stands for, the nature of its education and research environments, how it is contributing to the future of its students and the work of its faculty, which is both of which are, of course, a responsibility of a university, and collectively what that means for our societies. And in turn, the way a society as a whole reacts to these circumstances for universities will reflect what society does or does not value, and intentionally or not, will profoundly affect its future. And to deal with these challenges, I believe it's singularly important for universities to have clarity about the fundamental principles and values to guide us in making potentially difficult decisions. Without clarity about fundamental principles and the guideposts that they provide to action, decision-making will inevitably become reactive, and the likely result will be the weakening of universities by sequential catering to one segment or another of its complex constituency. So it's precisely these fundamental principles that I'll discuss today. Specifically, I want to address three questions. First, what are the principles of academic freedom, open inquiry, free expression, and intellectual challenge about, and why are they important? And second, what is the state of academic freedom and open inquiry on campuses today, and how can we explain it? And third, what should be the nature of our response to the current situation? So universities have two core missions: education and research, and along with those, the impact of education and research on individuals and on society. From their inception in Europe almost a millennium ago, universities have sought to empower their students for their futures beyond their studies. Needless to say, the conception and potential shape of these futures have evolved dramatically over the centuries, as has the education that universities offer. But this mission has been an enduring one. And today, from the world's great research universities to the smallest of colleges, this is one widely accepted mission. The research mission of universities was not as explicit for many years, although there was often a great deal of research taking place because of the intellectual quality and interests of certain faculty members. But with the founding of the University of Berlin in 1810, the trajectory of the university world changed. Research became an intrinsic and explicit part of the mission, and for research universities, education and research became intertwined. Inquiry became the heart of universities, inquiry into fields of research and education embedded in an environment of inquiry. The latter is captured nicely in a statement by Friedrich Schleiermacher, a broad thinker in Germany who was an active participant in the intellectual ferment that led to the founding of the University of Berlin. Schleiermacher, writing in 1808, 2 years before the founding of the University of Berlin, describes the goal of university education as enabling students, and now I'm quoting, to become aware of the principles of scholarship so that they themselves gradually acquire the ability to investigate, invent, and to give account. It's a beautiful phrase, to learn to investigate, invent, and to give account. Academic freedom, free expression, open and uninhibited discourse, questioning of assumptions and dominant paradigms, and ongoing intellectual challenge are critical values for university because their presence is required in a powerful and effective environment for research, education, and the inquiry that lies at their foundation. Speaking of foundation. Faculty involved in research need to revisit assumptions, freely explore new and imaginative approaches, develop, sharpen, and test new ideas, and understand boundaries, where their ideas and those of others apply productively and where they do not. Students need to develop intellectual skills and habits of mind, to confront new and different ideas through various modes of inquiry, recognize assumptions, both their own and those of others. And this, I think, is a critical point and is one of the hardest things for people to recognize their own assumptions, particularly in a critical way. Understand legitimate competing interests and the power and limitations of a given argument. Analyze unintended consequences, know the difference between a desire and an argument, appreciate context, history, and change, learn how to synthesize different perspectives, to engage in independent thought and not have their thought inextricably reflective of common or popular approaches, and to coherently advocate a position. Intellectual challenge, free expression, and open discourse are critical as a foundation for supporting both research and education of the type that I've just described. Abridging these features simply makes us worse at fulfilling our mission. We defend them because we're committed to the importance of research and education of our students, and we seek to do this at the highest level of excellence we can achieve. Mediocrity is easy, and if mediocrity is the aspiration, one can allow some erosion of these values, but excellence should be our aspiration. And excellence is not easy, and it comes with a price. And in this case, the excellence of the research and education at our institutions comes with the price of ensuring that the values of academic freedom, free expression, open discourse, and intellectual challenge are sustained and not eroded, are lived every day and not only when convenient, and are defended when attacked. As we know well from history, this is not always simple and can even become dangerous. And why are these missions of education and research so essential to societies? Every society faces complex challenges, and the world, encompassing many different societies and their interactions, adds another layer of complex challenges. Understanding how to think about these challenges the multiple perspectives from which they can and need to be viewed, the nature of discovery that can help address them, embedding relevant understanding of context and history, anticipating change, all these are immensely challenging, whether in science and technology, policy, economics, law and business, or the stewardship and understanding of societies, plural, cultures, and how they might interact. Universities are the core societal institutions for building the foundation for dealing with these challenges. The research they carry on today, the leaders and contributors of the future that they are training, provide, as no other institutions in society provide, a sustained capacity for addressing society's multiple and multifaceted challenges. With the benefit of having universities of excellence, an enlightened, broader society should, and sometimes does, realize the importance of academic freedom, free expression, and open discourse to its own well-being. Now let me turn to my second topic, the state of academic freedom and free expression on campuses. Understanding this, which you all have significant experience with, demands some historical context. I've described the critical importance of these values to the education and research missions of universities, and hence their capacity to contribute to societies around the world. Nevertheless, the history of universities, academic freedom and free expression, and open inquiry tells a much more complex story. Over the centuries, there have been constant battles over these issues with religious institutions, state authorities, and political and moral claims-based movements. One of the most famous of such battles with religious institutions was that of the Catholic Church with Galileo, who was a professor at the University of Padua, had been doing research that supported the heliocentric view of our solar system, a view that the Church found deeply problematic on the grounds of religious dogma. The decades-long battles culminated with the Inquisition trial that led to Galileo's guilty plea and house arrest for the remainder of his life. This is but one example of such battles with religious authorities that lasted for centuries. The struggles with state authorities, of course, has a similar long life. Our own times have seen dramatic such examples. In the middle of the 20th century, the University of Berlin became a shadow of its former self, first because of the Nazis and then the East German regime. But these effects were not constrained to the University of Berlin or to Germany in general. The University of Vienna, another Central European university of extraordinary achievement as a place of discourse and science, suffered a similar fate during the Anschluss and its aftermath. And the universities of Eastern Europe are still now in various stages of the process of recovering from the weight of domination by the Soviet Union. And of course, in the 1950s in the United States, we saw enormous pressure on universities to curtail free expression during the McCarthy Red Scare era. Beyond religious institutions and state authorities, there can be many other demands to constrain academic freedom and open discourse. Various political or moral claims movements have also regularly sought constraints on universities. They have come from all parts of the political spectrum. This is a major issue in the United States today, of course, as well as in Europe, and many individuals and groups are making constant demands upon universities to silence those with perspectives they find offensive or even that just make them uncomfortable. Moreover, as frequently the case for groups filled with self-righteousness, many simple, well-meaning behaviors are given malignant interpretations followed by demands for what are articulated as corrective action. Many universities are in fact acceding to these deeply misguided demands. This has also become a major issue elsewhere in the UK, for example, and it is, I believe, one of the great issues of our times for higher education in the US and elsewhere. The most dramatic and public ways in which political or moral claims movements are constraining free expression and academic freedom are the long list of disinvited speakers, including, for example, Christine Lagarde, Henry Kissinger, Condoleezza Rice, and Larry Summers. Other invited speakers being shouted down and not being allowed to speak, and faculty being called to task in a variety of ways for having controversial views. Sometimes violence has erupted because of the objections of a segment of a university community to a speaker's views or background. These, however, are just overt symptoms of yet more widespread and in some sense deeper problems. On some campuses, there's a tone of discourse ostracizing those with currently unpopular views. Faculty are concerned about bringing up certain topics and ideas for fear not of disagreement, but of being demonized. And some university administrators are actually fostering an environment in which students' feelings of discomfort with ideas take precedence over the importance of actually discussing ideas. How students interact with each other is often a casualty of these damaging tendencies. Students should be learning from each other by working through and discussing different opinions, analyses, backgrounds, perspectives, and cultures. But the environment of demonization and ostracism of those with opposing views can choke the intra-student discourse that is so vital to an education. These examples demonstrate that in addition to large-scale institutional structures, such as states or religious institutions, sometimes seeking to constrain academic freedom, demands for problematic constraints can arise from less formal but still potent political or moral claims groups, often from within universities themselves. This indicates that the formal protections provided by adhering to policies of academic freedom and free expression, notice that I didn't just say having policies, but adhering to them, need to be amplified by an institutional culture that supports argumentation, challenge, and respectful open discourse that allows for deep disagreements, independent thought, and an acceptance that discomfort will sometimes be a consequence of such a challenging environment. Let me relay a quick anecdote that I really enjoy about such a culture of intellectual challenge at the University of Chicago. Just because it was my personal experience, I will relay it to you. But it concerns 3 Nobel laureates in economics: Milton Friedman, Jim Heckman, and Bob Lucas. After Milton Friedman died, we had a memorial service for him, which as president, I was naturally going to speak. By coincidence, Jim Heckman was in my office a few days beforehand, and I asked him if he had any thoughts about what I might say. He suggested I read a paper of Friedman's entitled Positive Economics, and he was sure I would find it helpful for preparing my remarks. I followed his advice, read the paper. I did my homework from Heckman's conversation, and as predicted by Heckman, found inspiration for my comments. Following the service, we all went to a reception, and I ran into Bob Lucas. Lucas said to me first, nice remarks, typical polite thing one says. Then he paused for a moment and continued saying, but I always had a problem with that paper. And he then explained to me that what might appear to be the minor point, he felt was a real difficulty connected to the nature of knowledge and science. So Lucas was continuing to argue with Friedman even at his memorial service. That is an uninhibited environment of intellectual challenge and engagement. Given my remarks about why academic freedom, free expression, and open discourse are so important to universities and through them to society, why is there so much historical and present-day opposition? One part of this is not surprising. The long-standing issues with certain religious and state institutions are in many cases simply about power and its maintenance. There is evident fear that allowing open discourse will foster ideas that in one form or another will constrain the exercise or even maintenance of power. This is often accompanied by claims of either moral or political rectitude and value. You never hear anyone say, my having authority is actually not so great, but I want to suppress discourse anyway. Suppression of academic freedom is always accompanied by value claims, when in many cases the real issue is authority, either having it or aspiring to have it. But as we have discussed, there are also calls for suppressing open discourse and academic freedom from those not necessarily in a position of institutionalized power, but who make moral or political claims to validate their own position of suppression. Here again, we should not be surprised. In truth, many people, perhaps even most people, don't really like free expression in all its complexity. They fully support and are deeply committed to free expression for people they agree with. But tolerating speech that you might find offensive, dumb, morally questionable, politically objectionable, producing discomfort, or religiously undesirable is not something everyone naturally embraces. In other words, one reason we see a constant effort to constrain academic freedom and open discourse is that some people are trying to keep certain views unexpressed and unheard out of self-righteous moral or political indignation, an agenda driven by moral or political views, and comfort arrogating to themselves and those they agree with the right of speech while denying it to others. We have seen this throughout history, and we see it today in the moral claims arguments in the US, UK, and elsewhere. Therefore, in promoting an environment of academic freedom, free expression, and open discourse, one is always working against strong undercurrents that may rise and become visible at any moment. So my third topic is what to do about this situation of assault on principles so important to the quality of education and research. And I'll mention three approaches that I believe are relevant, and of course there can be many others. First, as I indicated earlier, is clarity that these are fundamental principles for the very meaning and quality of universities. A contrary view, which sometimes one hears explicitly and more often sees implicitly, is that universities are very complex institutions with a very complex set of interested party and constituents, many things it's trying to accomplish, and many issues that must be balanced, and that academic freedom and free expression are either explicitly or implicitly just one of the things among many that must be balanced, weighed, and sometimes traded off. With this type of position, it is inevitable that university leaders and faculty will find themselves succumbing to great pressure for constrained speech. Therefore, a primary approach necessary for maintaining academic freedom is the clarity that this is not just one of the hoped-for features of universities, but for reasons I described earlier, is essential to the university's very meaning and mission and the fulfillment of that mission at the highest level. Just might add here that one thing that I've not found helpful is this notion of the multiversity, which in fact I was being interviewed in China about free expression. Remarkably, I get interviewed in China about free expression all the time. And the interviewer said, what do you think of the notion of the multiversity, because universities are so complex and so on? And obviously expecting me to embrace it and to acknowledge his sophistication on the subject. And I said, I don't like it. And I said, the reason I don't like it is that it detracts attention from what needs to be paid attention to all the time. That universities have a very real mission and need to have very real values to fulfill that mission at the highest level. And suggesting that the way to think about a university as a multiversity is exactly that there are so many things to do and so many things that can go wrong that what you're really trying to do is get to the end of the week without a disaster. And, honestly, sometimes you talk to university presidents about this topic, and that's what it feels like. And that's not really very helpful. Second, one cannot rely solely on formalisms and policy. One needs to build and sustain a culture that lives open inquiry every day. This means a constant effort on the part of faculty and university leaders to promote and model the values of open inquiry and intellectual challenge in all their work on campus every day, and for students to learn to appreciate why these values are so important to the quality of their education. Otherwise, it's too easy to have a set of rules and policies about academic freedom, but also a sterile and quietly suppressed environment that embodies fear of discourse and fear of engagement of disparate views, rather than one that embraces robust discussion. The third feature is courage. Whether dealing with attempts by an institutional authority, such as a state, or with a passionate group of moral self-righteousness claiming moral authority and virtue, standing for principle is not simple. It requires courage, which increases the chance for success, but in truth cannot guarantee it. And let me conclude by returning to Galileo. There's a well-known and perhaps apocryphal story that after being convicted, he muttered, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves, talking about the earth. It is up to us today, perhaps, to rephrase Galileo at this important moment for academic freedom in universities throughout the world by saying out loud this time, eppur pensiamo, eppur parliamo, and yet we think, and yet we speak. Congratulations once again to FIRE for its important and effective work, and particularly to the faculty connected to FIRE who of necessity will play a critical role in helping the universities in our country return to living the fundamental principles on which outstanding educational and research environments depend. Thank you very much.
And Chancellor Zimmer, thank you very much for your remarks. We have some time, probably about 20, 25 minutes for questions and answers, and I'm happy to do it the way we've kind of been doing it today. Start with a show of hands, and I'm just going to pass this microphone around. There you go. Jeff?
Thank you for a really wonderful talk. So you're a mathematician. A lot of the people in this room, I suspect, are social scientists. We maybe have some philosophers. I'm a historian. Thinking about how to build a coalition of academics who are interested in and committed to academic freedom. How do you suggest we think about attracting people in STEM, fields like math, fields like biology, engineering, and so on? It's my impression that they've been underrepresented and not especially vocal in this particular area.
That's actually interesting because I don't find that that's the case at Chicago. There's a lot of science faculty at Chicago who are very interested in this topic. And people outside science and mathematics may not be focused on this, and perhaps it's a little surprising, but there are party lines about how to think about certain things in mathematics. Doesn't mean that it's not right or that they're advocating things that are wrong. I mean, these are not stupid people. But there's a framing and perspective on how you think about certain kinds of issues. And it can be not so simple to say, I have a very different point of view on these kinds of questions. And geometry is a very interesting case of this, where, if you look at mathematics and its history and say, what is it fundamentally about? I mean, two things that it's always been about are measuring and shape. And of course, at one point in France, these two things came together. But so when you're thinking about shape and geometry, what ways are there to think about it? Turns out there's an enormous number of different ways to think about it. And each one gives you different kind of insight. But you can find yourself at a moment where in a field, the popular angle on this is one thing or another, and seems uninteresting to people. You're not excoriated for thinking differently, but you're thought about as somehow outside the mainstream, and therefore raising the question of, what is the value of this? I had this experience myself when I started working on my dissertation. And I had a very, shall we say, loose mathematical connection to my dissertation advisor. And he didn't know what I was doing until I'd finished about 3/4 of my dissertation. And so I was studying a certain field called ergodic theory, and there was some very terrific discoveries that had taken place, but the whole field became find the next good result based on what this guy at Stanford had done. And that was never emotionally my thing. And so I started doing something very, very different. And 45 years later, it's worked out okay. But it took some time, and it was helped by a couple of people, one in Paris and one in Berkeley, who were not insisting that everybody think about what Don Ornstein in Palo Alto had done. And so this arises over and over again. And, you hear this sort of somewhere between depressing and ironic statement of science advancing funeral by funeral. And it's meant to capture that sense that you have powerful figures, and it's not that they are trying to control the world, but in fact, just the power of the ideas becomes so strong that it defines fields in a way that becomes constraining. So I think that scientists in general are very aware of this, and many of them have had this experience. And, you certainly get it in the physical sciences, and obviously you get it in biology, which is transforming very rapidly. So I think this sense of the sciences as, there's stuff that's right and everybody knows what it is, and you don't need a lot of free expression because, you do your experiment or you prove your theorem and everybody says, oh, good work. Sometimes.
Give it to you, Aaron.
Thank you for your excellent talk. Aaron O'Connor from Santa Barbara, California. I actually am a science astronomy professor. I love your analogy with Galileo, and I've met several other science people here. So I think the STEM fields are greatly interested in free speech and what's happening. And recently, especially with global warming, with genetics, with principles of evolution, and of course, COVID vaccines. Science is in the news. It's being challenged in ways that science faculty never could have imagined. You alluded in your talk about disinvitations, and of course, we are all familiar with the severe challenges that speakers and universities are facing with speakers that are being disinvited or aggressively shouted down. But you represent an administrative perspective, and you're one of the first administrators I've heard take a very strong public stance on, how a lot of administrators are, taking the position of, basically caving in to the threats and challenges because of the bad publicity and the demonization. But you are not presenting this. How do you think administrations of these higher education universities, how do you think they should deal with this, and how can we as faculty support them?
I think one of the problems goes to this issue of understanding what is the university really about, and what is your job when you're the president. Let me give you another small anecdote. I was at some event, I don't remember what it was, and it wasn't for university presidents, but there was another university president there. So I'm sure much to his dismay, I sort of came up and said, you know, what's going on with free expression at your place? And I'm sure he was saying, why did I come to this event? But anyway, I asked that question, and the answer he gave was, my fundamental concern is safety of our students and faculty. And I said, well, you know, of course you want to keep everybody safe, but that's not really what I would call a strategic point of view around free expression. It would be as if I asked you, what's your strategy for the development of science at your university? Now, every president needs to have an answer for that. I mean, you just need to. You're really not doing your job if you don't have an answer to that. And I said, it's as if I asked you that question, and you said, my fundamental concern, lab safety. Now, lab safety is important. You can get hurt in a lab. There's all sorts of weird stuff there, and all sorts of oddball machines that as a mathematician I could never get any machine to work. But lab safety is important, but it's not a strategy. It's something you have to take care of. And there's so much of that in a university, of so many things that need to be taken care of. And you need to learn how to do that. But you also need to learn to separate what are all the things you need to take care of when you're running fundamentally quite a large and complex enterprise, and what are we actually about? What are we about? And I think it's way too easy, because these jobs are hard and they're challenging. And it's way too easy to have this point of view of, there's so much going on, I got to get through till Friday afternoon. And so I think it's just very important that there be some clarity on the part of the campus of what are we about. Now, I'll give you one other example where this comes up. I've been invited to a few places to talk about free expression, and at one, faculty member said to me, look, you guys at Chicago, have a long history around this, you've got it figured out and so on. We can't figure it out. We talk about it, this one thinks that one thinks this. We can't figure it out. How do we figure it out? And I said, first you have to answer a question, which is, what does it mean when you give someone a diploma? You're certifying something. Hopefully it's not just that they signed up for a certain number of classes, wrote a certain number of papers, and took a certain number of exams without embarrassing themselves. Is that all it's about? Is that what you would say? Or is there something more to it? And the answer I got was, well, I don't know, we don't really talk about that very much. And I said, well, if you can't answer that question, you're never going to be able to answer the question around free expression, because then it becomes well, this one likes it, this one doesn't, and there's no resolution to a I like it, I don't kind of argument. Then it feels like you're at a Thanksgiving dinner with your uncles, and that goes nowhere. So I do think that sense of having some clarity about what are we about, rather than just what are the things we need to deal with, and saying these are the fundamental principles of what we are trying to do, what our mission is, and what we have to do in order to fulfill it. Well, not just do it and at the end of the day say, wow, we could have been much better if we had done something else. So I really think that getting that kind of clarity and some joint understanding between the faculty, I mean, ultimately it needs to be the faculty that makes that type of statement, but having president sort of should be a joint effort of the importance of having some clarity about that, because it will then make things about free expression a lot easier.
I'll bring it to you next to the one about 10 minutes.
I really enjoyed your talk. I'm Tim Schill from UW Stout. One of the things that's concerned me is the pressure that outside groups, in particular donors, very wealthy donors, can have on institutional decisions. And we've seen some cases in recent years, most recently at Yale, just a few weeks ago, where donors' threats to academic freedom aren't resisted by administrators. And some years ago, I ran across this in a very personal way when I wrote my first book on campus free speech. And the chancellor, we call them chancellors instead of presidents in Wisconsin, said, Tim, it's a great book, but you're so naive. You don't understand the pressures that I have to deal with from politicians, from donors, and from all these other people. And, I, not being in his position, what do I say other than be more courageous, Chuck? I don't, I don't know. So I'm just so curious, what experiences you might have had with those sorts of political pressures or pressures from donors, and what strategies you maybe use to try to resist those and defend these principles that you and I hold dear to us.
Yeah. Well, we are very, very clear in talking to people, whether it's a group that wants to disinvite somebody, whether it's a group that wants us to engage in some sort of academic boycott, whether it's donors who want to control something. We make it absolutely clear that we're just not going to do that. That's it. You don't like us for that reason? Okay, we get it. You can do what you want, your money, but we are just not going to do it. And with an explanation as to why, which you can produce as easily as I. So, we had one, I have not found it as difficult a problem in terms of you run into people. I mean, we've had cases where, we just say we're not going to do that. So we can look for a way in which something that you want can be done at this university, but there are places in terms of your involvement that we're just not going to go under any circumstances. So we've had cases like that, and we just say no. And we had one firm that wanted, this was one of the more bizarre ones, that wanted to make some sort of deal with us around commercializing intellectual property, okay, which I think is an okay enterprise for universities to be involved in. It's a way of seeing the maximal impact for certain faculty of their work if they want it, because they want that kind of impact, we want to support them. But this firm came and wanted to essentially buy an option of some incredible scope in which we were making commitments to agree would be making commitments of faculty who had not had a chance to weigh in or who might not even be at the university yet. So this was out of the question because, when people brought this to me, a few vice presidents who had brought this, do we want to do this or not? And I said, to do this changes the meaning of what it means to be a faculty member at the University of Chicago in a way that's totally unacceptable. So the answer is unequivocally no, we're not going to do this. And it was high tens of millions of dollars. But, it's not, we're not for sale in that way. And it's true there's a lot of pressure, but, why do you want the job? I mean, to me, you want the job of being president because universities have real meaning and real value and do important things that you can't really do anywhere else. And you want to help facilitate that and sustain that. If that's not what you want to do, I'd rather go back and be a mathematics professor, which I still find pretty interesting. So it does so much and so often, it comes down to me to clarity about principles and what you're about. And you just have to do it. And I tell all the vice presidents who are now working for the president, so I hope he says that too, that for every decision you're making, and I mean everyone, you have to keep the mission and values of the university in front of you. And it's pretty interesting how often that becomes important. I think it's important for presidents to remember it, but they need clarity about it, and they don't all have it. And faculty can do a good job educating presidents as well as educating students. Something I'm sure you get widespread agreement on among faculty.
So, wow, this is loud. My name is Luana Maroja. I'm in Williams College. And my question is about the president's response to, so basically we tried to get the Chicago statement adopted by our college. I and two other professors sent around a petition, which then was leaked to students, and a whole pandemonium started. And the president then requested to talk to the three of us. We went there, and her response left me speechless. So I'm wondering how you would have responded. So what she said was that she agrees with us. She is a historian, and she thinks that freedom of inquiry and freedom of speech is essential. However, we are the dying generation, and we're going to be replaced, and it's better to go with the flow. How would you respond to that?
Well, we're not gone yet. And while we're here, we're going to do the right thing. And if we don't, the next generation's going to be left with a dramatically weaker organization that has no clarity about its mission and is doing a disservice to students. I mean, this is an important thing. People sometimes feel, well, you know, students don't like this, they don't like that, they want to be comfortable, and, you know, they have a certain political slant that they want to see reflected in the university. I mean, I know many of you, probably not all of you, but many of you have raised children, and just doing whatever you think the kid wants to make the kid have an easy life for the half hour is not always doing the best thing for them. And we're not really fulfilling our responsibility to students if we say, yes, you're being comfortable is the most important thing. You know, I mean, you have to we want to give you intellectual skills that are going to serve you for the rest of your life, independent of whatever you do. And for people who have had a really good college education and put effort into it, and the school put effort into it, you know, you hear it all the time of how alumni will say, being a student changed my life for the better in ways that are just immeasurable. And it's gratifying to hear. And also makes you realize why financial aid is so important. It's a whole other topic that I have a lot to say about, but I don't have to say it tonight. You know, I mean, to my mind, if you have this environment where kids can't hear people with different views, and in particular where you're not having an environment where people argue with each other. I mean, one of the great parts of being in college was staying up late and arguing, even without the vodka. And I went to college during the Vietnam War, and so for those of you who are roughly the same age, you also remember that there was one topic that absorbed the conversation every night, which was that, and all the other questions that brought up. But, you know, it created an argumentative and disputatious environment where people had different views, and it, you know, you learned a lot.
Time for one, maybe two more, but Sid, you go.
Sure. Hi, Sid Roy, Virginia Tech. I have a temperament question. Even if we have clarity on values and facts, so I'm in STEM, so oftentimes we throw out evidence and then we get pushback. Do you have any psychological tips when the mob comes for you? Like, how do you prepare yourself to weather the storm with your rich experience of being attacked? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'll try to leave out all the expletives. But, you know, some of that is not so bad. I mean, having expletives in mind, because just from well, what can I say? I think you get used to it. Like everything else, you get better when you practice. And so I think preparing yourself is a good thing, because you really often deal with behavior that's so outrageous that I would never behave that way to other people. And yet, you know, here's this group. Of course, the question I always want to ask is, being on the south side of Chicago, we do a lot with the community on the south side. It's very important for us, and we've done a lot. And community's basically all African American. And so then you get accused on various sorts of diversity issues. Even, we've been trying, and everything's not perfect, but I feel like often saying to people who are accusing me of not doing enough of this or that, I say, what have you done exactly? I can actually tell you what we've done, and it's a lot, but what have you done? And even though you probably don't want to have that explicit a statement, I find it's helpful to keep in mind that, you're talking to post-adolescents, and they have had very little experience. They don't really know what they're talking about. And, they've got a lot of, I don't know if age appropriate is correct, but age common, high intensity emotional responses to various things. And right now they're taking it out on you. And, a lot of these things are ultimately about their parents also. I mean, it's just is. And so I had an interesting conversation about being president. I had it with Hannah Gray, who was, there were two presidents between Hannah and me. She was president for 15 years also. And I had lunch with Hannah, and I said, Hannah, I need to ask you a question. I said, let me tell you a reaction I'm having about the difference between being provost and being president. I said, when you're provost, everybody's always angry at you because you're giving out money, and you're giving it to somebody who's not them. And people are saying, you don't know what you're doing. What I'm doing is way more important than what that person's doing, and more expensive too. So I need the money. And so people get mad at you because you've got this position of agency around money and so on. So I said, okay, you get that. But being president, people are responding to you in a totally different way. And it has to do with your being a type of authority and parental figure, even to people who are 65 years old. And because nobody forgets. And it's people are really responding to you in this very, Oedipal way. And it's, it makes it more complicated. But on the other hand, it makes it easier to be forgiving, but it also means that you can, you can be a little more ready for it when you have that kind of mindset. But also this, you're talking to mostly, not always, because of course sometimes you're talking to other faculty, you're not talking to students who unfortunately can have as much trouble with free expression as some students do, which is kind of very sorry. But, we all know it's true. We all know. We can all name people. So maybe the best thing is to say practice helps.
I think that that is going to bring us to time, but before I let us go, before I take us down the hall for our reception, I just want to again thank you, Chancellor Zimmer, for taking the time to meet with our faculty, to speak with us this evening. One thing I think you'll be familiar with this in the last couple of years, FIRE has done large-scale surveys of student attitudes on free expression, and in both of those, the University of Chicago has ranked very high. It
Yeah,
ranked-
but what's with this two? I've never aspired to two.
it's
But
already
I know it's what your data shows.
well that little disagreement aside, one thing that we have, one thing that we have to an extent been able to measure, looking through the data and going through all of the individual survey responses that we've gotten from the many thousands of students that we've talked to in these surveys, we have to an extent been able to quantify the value of a strong leadership role in setting expectations and influencing a culture of free expression at an institution. And you led the University of Chicago for 15 years. I'm not sure you're able to quantify to yourself. I'm not sure if you have the distance to do it, but it's something that we can see how important strong leadership, a strong role at the top is. And for that, we thank you. And I can only say that I hope a lot more university leaders will look to the example that you've set. So, Chancellor, thank you very much. from all
Okay,
of us.
thanks.